Talk to me about depression.
Well, what's interesting about depression is when I was in the life insurance business, when I was in the mortality space, the prevailing, we've now disproven the serotonin hypothesis, but the prevailing hypothesis at the time was that depression was due to low levels of serotonin. This is the whole concept behind SSRIs, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And we said, if you were low on serotonin, you were by definition depressed. And I remember I used to think all the time, well, if the definition of depression is low serotonin, then why are we not trying to raise serotonin? Because that's not what we did.
SSRI does attempt to raise the availability, right? So it's saying keep it in the system so it's available. Don't
it doesn't actually really raise serotonin. What it does is it rations what little serotonin you have. And the way that it rations is it inhibits the receptors that uptake
So you're
serotonin.
saying what they should have done is how do you get it to produce more?
So you instead of having a full cup of water, you've got a quarter cup of water. So now but it has to last you all day. So you just sip on it all day instead of whacking it back all in the morning, having a massive emotional response in the morning, and then the coffee being able to the cup being able to fill itself the rest of the way back up. So the methylation of these neurotransmitters, like we talked about, it begins in the gut. Right? I mean, 90% of the neurotransmitter production in our bodies happens in the gut before it travels up the vagus nerve and it goes into the brain and it's secreted by it's secreted. It's not made in the brain, but it's secreted by the brain. And so the supply of these neurotransmitters is heavily tied to this gut-brain axis. And so, certainly depression can begin in the outside environment. There are plenty of traumatic events that can cause people to be depressed, but people that suffer from prolonged depression, I mean, I've had people come in to see me that and I ask them, how long have you been on antidepressants? And they say 15 or 18 years. I mean, my first question is always, when did you think it was going to kick in?
That's a great question.
I mean, when did you think it was going to kick in? And by that time,
it usually helps them just enough that they remain hopeful.
Yeah, that they remain hopeful, which is super sad to me because, I always use this analogy that when I was in grad school, I was getting my second human biology degree, and I had to take all these plant botany courses, which I absolutely hated, but you have to take them to get the degree. Morphology of thallophytes and all this nonsense. But what really struck me about these courses is that anytime there was something wrong in a bush, tree, shrub, right? If you were to actually call a true arborist or true botanist out to your house, and you got a palm tree and the leaves are rotting in the palm tree, they actually won't touch the leaves, the branches, the trunk of the tree. The first thing they'll do is they'll core test the soil, right? And they'll go, you know what, there's no nitrogen in the soil. And then they'll add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf will heal. But we don't think about human beings like this anymore. We've lost so much faith in mankind and so much faith in humanity and the ability of this to heal this. And so when we look at nutrient deficiencies in the soil causing disease all the way up in the leaf, you have to look at nutrient and physiological deficiencies in the body causing issues in the brain. Things that we call mental disease, mental disorders. If you actually boil down the majority of mental disease or mental conditions, they, at their root cause, they are a lack of raw material. Right? They're missing nutrients in the human body, causing the physiology to misbehave. Just like I said, just taking butter away from a bakery chef. Right? It's a single ingredient, but it's a necessary part of so many recipes. If I said you can bake whatever you want, you just can't use butter, even though it doesn't sound like a big deal because it's one ingredient, it would affect so many recipes. When you go into the gut and you deprive the gut of its process of methylation, which is the creation of a lot of these neurotransmitters, you lack supply. When you lack supply, you lack the capacity to create certain mood, and then we call this a disease or a mental disorder or a mental condition where you have ADD or ADHD or OCD or manic depression or bipolar or you're schizophrenic or you're any number of things. You have generalized anxiety or generalized depression. I don't think the human beings break down that bad, and certainly not in the numbers that we have going on in the United States. I think that we have a lack of mental fitness secondary to a lack of nutrients in the human body. And the majority of our diets lack basic nutrients. The majority of our routines lack the capacity to give us the basic physiology so that we don't have a mental condition.